All right, I think we should get started. Nancy, am I okay to get started?
Yep, you're go ahead.
Thanks so much. So I wanted to welcome everyone to the session this morning, and the session is going to be about seeing new possibilities and closing equity gaps. Now, we're going to be talking about a concept called student elasticity, which sounds jargony, but we'll get to it and you'll understand it. The Center for Student Analytics at Utah State University is a new center, and I'm Dr. Mitch Culver. I'm the director of that center. And we're a center that's designed around using data to actually move things to action. And really, we're focused on professional development. I know I have thick glasses and I might seem like a data nerd, but our goal at the Center for Student Analytics is really to help universities and educators to understand that data is a tool or resource that can help us to optimize our educational environments. As long as we're being intentional with that data and collaborative, which is part of our mission, is the intentionality and collaborative, intentional and collaborative approach to helping people see how analytics can help educational environments achieve greater equity and really facilitate student success. Now, I know that a lot of attendees today are from K-12 environments, and I want to talk to you about that because much of the data I'm going to present here is university-related data, but there's strong evidence to support that the principles and theories that I'm going to walk you through today filter down to K-12 settings as well. And so we really want to be thinking about students who are at promise. We want to be thinking about them in a holistic way. And my goal is to help you see how analytics can help us capture the spirit of the at promise philosophy. All right, so let me start and just ask this question, and you can respond. If you'd like to speak, you're able to speak. I'm happy to actually be interrupted. In online environments, barging in is like raising your hand. It's very polite to barge in a Zoom meeting. I think that's just fine. But does anyone have any thoughts about this question? I'm going to answer this in some subsequent slides, but is there research evidence that students should be referred to as at promise rather than at risk? Have you seen research that specifically asks and answers that question? Does anyone have any thoughts about this question that they'd like to share? Let's see. I could call on someone. It's a shame I can't see your faces. I might look for someone kind and say, hey, what's your perspective on this?
I would say just recently reading some research myself, I have seen far more often than I should, research still using the term at risk in a lot of webinars I attend or videos I watch. Those tend to use at promise more.
Yeah.
Just something that recently came to mind doing some research I was doing.
Good, April. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Jody, did you have a thought? Oh, it looks like we can't hear you, but you're unmuted on Zoom. But for some reason, your audio is not coming through. It might be a microphone issue, Jody. Yeah, strange. Okay, thanks. Thank you for your willingness. That actually can be a good way of raising your hand, is turning your camera on. If you ever want to speak, I'll see your cameras come on, and then I'll know that you have something to say. Well, let's get to the meat of this. My very first published study was back from Eastern Washington University, where I used to work, and we were evaluating a tutoring center for peer tutoring. I had 60 employees at the time, and over 4 years, we did an assessment to figure out, does tutoring work? And here's what we found. So we had a comparison group design where we looked at a batch of students. All of the students had to take a course 2 times because in their first attempt, they got below a 2.0. And so they're going to have to retake it to get above a 2.0. And we saw students retaking with tutoring the second time, even though no one had tutoring in the first attempt. Sometimes students would retake with tutoring, and sometimes students would retake without tutoring. And those who retook without, they were their exact classmates in those same courses. And so we were able to use them as a comparison group. And what we found was a significant effect of tutoring on course grade improvement. And it may not look like a big difference, but the real telling thing here is that those two lines cross each other like an X. And what that means is that even though they kind of both ended up 2.5, 2.3-ish area, those who got tutoring actually had started lower than those who didn't get tutoring, and then closed that gap and then exceeded that gap. And it's the closing of the gap and exceeding the gap that I want you to focus on. Now, I'm going to show you the next slide, which graphs out an interaction effect between being first generation college student with tutoring versus the other categories, right? And what you can see here is that triangle in the first attempt is the lowest. So first generation students who ultimately sought tutoring, they started out as having the lowest grade, but ended up with the best result in the second attempt. And because this graph's a little hard to read, I'm going to go to the next slide because it shows those differences actually kind of plotted out, right? So what kind of grade improvement can you expect if you're a first generation student and you get tutoring compared to if you're a continuing generation student and you get tutoring? Well, it's a half a grade point higher, which is nothing to shake a stick at. And then obviously the continuing generation, no tutoring, right? Here's the interesting thing is continuing generation, no tutoring, there's a non-significant difference between their gain and the gain achieved by continuing generation with tutoring. And of course, first generation without tutoring, they perform the least well. Now, this interaction effect is really, really cool because what it tells you is, and what it describes is what's called student elasticity. And elasticity is just like a rubber band. If you're going to shoot a rubber band and you pull it a little bit of the ways back and then let go, it goes a little ways. If you pull a rubber band way back and you really stretch it out, when you finally let go and reduce the resistance, it flies. And student elasticity is a really great way to understand the concept of being at promise. So many of these students in this example, first generation students who are traditionally vulnerable because of a lack of intergenerational knowledge about collegiate experiences, they have significant barriers that stretch them. And as soon as you give them a resource like tutoring that helps eliminate those barriers, those students, man, they fly. And it's really very exciting. And so this is kind of my first experience as a data scientist, as a researcher, as a faculty member. It's my first experience looking at data and saying, man, that term at risk is all wrong. These students have great elasticity. They've been stretched. And as soon as we eliminate those barriers, they are going to go flying and really excel and exceed even above their peers. Now, I want to open it up because we have plenty of time. I built a presentation that has room for discussion. Does anyone have any questions or reactions to what you're seeing and thoughts that you'd like to share with the group? Because I really would like to hear from others rather than just hearing me talk the whole time. Anyone have any thoughts or questions about this? Jody, we can hear you.
I have a question.
Yeah, great.
I put in the earbuds. Maybe I missed it when I was trying to deal with my microphone issues. What is the definition of at promise in this particular research? Like, so what made these students at promise?
What made these students at promise was that the tutoring is not just about in the program I ran, the tutoring was not just about the course material and concepts. It wasn't just about helping the students understand the lectures or understand the textbooks. The tutoring I had designed always include what we called a psychosocial component of holistic development. And that meant that these students were working with tutors who would spend 5 to 10 minutes each session, 2 to 3 times a week, talking to the student about their academic motivation, talking to them about their study skills, talking to them about resources that they can rely on to get a better grade, talking to them about what we would call maybe the hidden curriculum of the university, things you need to know that if no one told you, you wouldn't otherwise know. First generation students, one of the reasons why their results, at least initially without the proper supports in place, tend to be lower than continuing generation students is that continuing generation students often have parents who are feeding them that hidden curriculum without even realizing it, helping them navigate the complex web that a university is, more successfully than a first generation student would. And so what they're at promise for is the closing of the gap of that holistic knowledge about what makes college life work. And that's why we think we're seeing these results, is that psychosocial component. Does that answer your question?
You're considering, so first generation is your definition of at risk in this case.
That's right.
Because they lack those other things. Okay, I'm following.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other thoughts or questions? I know how to call on people. Maybe I should do that. I'm good at calling on people.
I'm good at talking, but I like to give other people. Did you do anything with socioeconomic status or race, ethnicity?
Not in this particular study. It wasn't the goal of the study, and the data wouldn't have necessarily been available to us based on the program that we were running. So that's a good question, but good question. Okay, the plot thickens. Let me talk a little bit about analytics. This is Heather Humphreys. She was an advisor at Utah State University, where I work now, and she had been given a resource that we provide through our Center for Student Analytics called Inspire for Advisors. And that resource builds a predictive model about students' relative likelihood to persist towards graduation from term to term. Now, analytics are something I came to later in my career. And I was actually trained as a mental health counselor, and that was my goal at first in my master's program 10 years ago when I finished. And then I got into higher ed and did some different things with learning science and got my PhD in learning science. And then eventually joined the analytics community. Now, I partly joined the analytics community because I had concerns about the way predictive models would be used if they weren't being used with a kind of philosophical carefulness, right? Predictive models are easily weaponized against students. And I didn't want to see that happening. And so I started getting more and more involved in analytics, not because I wanted analytics to be unhinged and people to do whatever they want with analytics, but just the opposite. I wanted to be an expert in student success analytics so that I can help people act ethically with them and within philosophical grounds that I felt were actually effective and protected students' interests, because I could see the writing on the wall that analytics could easily be weaponized. Well, we released this model to advisors with great ethics training and a lot of training about how to be effective with it. And Heather got those analytics, and there's these 5 color groups. So red, orange, yellow, green, and blue. And you could call the red, orange, yellow, you can call them at-risk groups. We refer to them as academically vulnerable groups. And that's a way of signaling that they're at promise. If a student in the middle of a semester receives a signal that they're orange, and an advisor gets an email saying this student's orange, then the advisor can intervene in a compassionate, appreciative manner to help the student maybe get back on track. Now, they don't call the student up and say, dear student, we have analytics and they turned orange today for you, and now I'm intervening, because that would be, that would be dangerous, actually. We don't tell students that, we don't go around telling students we've made a prediction and here's what the prediction is. What we do instead, and what Heather did, was in this one particular case, there was a student who had been kind of flagged as orange, and so Heather called her up and did a good version, and which we've trained on. And the version is this: she calls and says, now, hey, dear student, I'm your academic advisor, and in time things change and we haven't seen each other for a few months. Would you come in and see me, and then we can update each other about how things are going, and then I'll know if there's anything I need to help you with. And in this way, she does the very careful thing of not signaling to the student any concern, because analytics aren't powerful enough to help us to know that we should be anything more than suspicious of concern, right? This is really an important principle to understand. And I'm building a whole research program and career out of helping people realize the strengths, but more importantly, the limitations of analytics. So Heather did that. She called the students and said, hey, we haven't seen each other for a while. Could you come in and update me on how things are going? The student arrived. Heather put the analytics in the drawer because they don't help you have the conversation you need to have, right? She asked the student appreciative questions, and the student kind of started to say, yeah, it's not going very well because I've been diagnosed with lymphoma. And basically, I've been given a death sentence. Like, I'm going to die in the next couple of years, and it's really awful. And I don't have motivation, so I haven't been doing my classes, and it's really frustrating. And Heather was clever and said, well, one of the faculty members in our department has had lymphoma too, and it ended up being the same exact kind. Would you like them to mentor you? Like, would you want someone to talk to about this? And the student was like, oh, I'd love that. So they got that resource connected, and the student benefited greatly from the faculty member's advice about how to manage this, about how to keep on moving and work towards your goals. The student did that semester, completed it, did the next semester, and then was completing her degree. And it's a bittersweet story because the student finished her degree and her diploma was mailed on the day that she died, the day that she actually passed away. But the family told Heather how much they appreciated that she was able to get her back on those goals, because it really helped her finish out strong in her life and really feel a sense of purpose in those final stages of her life. Now, the story here is about an idea that an analytic system can predict that a student is in some kind of distress because it's picking up signals from the learning management system. You know, this student hadn't been logging in, hadn't been submitting assignments. But that when we intervene in a really compassion-focused, appreciative manner, we can be that resource that the student needs to really deliver on the promise that they already have. And so you could easily have said that that student was at risk of not completing her degree, but because Heather had this appreciative approach and really understood the strengths and more importantly, the limitations of analytics, she was able to intervene in a way that capitalized on that student's elasticity and gave her the supports the student needed to be successful. And we see a lot of these stories. We have actually lots of examples. And if you're interested, reach out and I can give you several more examples. It occurs to me, I've been asking people to turn on their mics, and what I really should do every time I ask a question is stop and look at the Whova chat. I haven't been monitoring that, and I will start to do that the next time. I can't see it now, but I'll be able to look at it in a minute. I can pull it up on my computer. So the question is, how did the computer know? Well, here's how that system works. It starts with 1,800 variables, and then it looks through all that student data and finds patterns, the 67 variables that are the highest performing predictors of student well-being from term to term. And then it kind of selects the 10 or 15, 20 that are actionable, and that kind of surfaces those to us. Now, if you're interested in kind of what are we learning from these analytics models, you can go and get this Student Insights report. We publish this each year, and it was an ASPA honorable mention for Evaluation Innovation Awards. But you can download it at this website, ais.usu.edu/analytics. And next time I'm in the chat, I'll see if I can pop that link in there so you can go and get this report. But the point is that those top 15 to 20 actionable insights really help us to build and optimize our student ecosystems to be more successful for students who would otherwise be vulnerable of leaving without a degree, leaving with debt, not being able to pay it back. And so the thing is about it is the models have limitations, right? So the model is only 85% accurate. And this is one of the important things to understand about when you're thinking about how can analytics help us identify student vulnerabilities and really take productive, compassion-focused action. One of the key things you have to understand about any analytic system is they're never 100% accurate. So any prediction you make about a student has to be held tentatively, because the 1 in 7, 1 in 8 predictions that a computer predictive modeling system makes ends up being wrong. And so if Heather had called and said, hey, you're orange, I know you're orange, I know you're at risk, that puts the student in a state of increased vulnerability, because now they're worrying about, why is the computer saying I'm vulnerable? Like, I don't feel vulnerable. Because in that case, the computer ended up being onto something, but it's entirely possible that that same student could have come through the door and said, no, I'm fine. I'm just fine. And Heather would have gone, are you? And they would say, yeah. Okay, well, tell me about how you're fine. I'm fine in these ways and all these critical ways. And then Heather would have said, okay, that's great. Thank you so much. So it's important to understand that analytics as a tool for identifying student vulnerability and identifying when students are at promise for intervention can be effective, but have those limitations of that 85% accuracy. Now, what does the model look like? Well, this is kind of one of the dashboards that we work in. And at Civitas Learning, they provide this, and you get 5 buckets, right? So a student can be red, which is at less than 20% likelihood of persisting towards graduation goals. 20 to 50% likelihood is the orange, and then so on from there. And each student is assigned in one of these bands. And when students fall below the blue-green, then advisors kind of reach out and say, hey, we'd like to interact with you so that we can really offer assistance. We've shown this to students. Students like this. And one of the things they like it most about it is that we're not trying to put it in their face, that we're doing it through this appreciative way of, when the light turns on, we don't assume there's a problem. When the light turns on, we just know it's time to be sitting with this student and seeing if there's anything we can do to help them. Now, how does this play out in advising? And this is more evidence of how at-promise students have a great deal more elasticity than less academically vulnerable students. So these are success quartiles. So we have the top success quartiles, and then the navy blue bars are students who participate in advising. And the light blue bars are students who don't participate in advising in a given semester. And what you see is their actual persistence rate in the following term. Well, what you notice is that for these top performing students, advising is making a less than a 1% non-significant difference in their persistence towards their goals. That's because it's a ceiling effect. These students are already doing well enough that the influence of an academic advisor doesn't really change much, right? It doesn't really fiddle with any of their success. They're going to be successful anyway. Then we call that a ceiling effect. But already at the third quartile, success quartile of these next most high performing students, we see a 4% gain from meeting with that academic advisor in that psychosocial support system, right? Then the second quartile, we see a 10% gain. And for the bottom quartile, who are students who I think we would traditionally have referred to the bottom quartile, these red, orange, and yellow students, we would refer to them as at risk. And the model is predicting, well, they're likely to leave here without a degree, and they're going to have to pay back any debt that they have, and this is going to be awful because they're not going to have a degree. But really, this chart spells it out so clearly. Those students in the bottom are at such great promise for experiencing a successful collegiate experience. And what's making that possible is this added resource of the advisor who's acting in a compassionate and appreciative manner, so that that gain is really manifest. And this is what we would call a causal estimated impact, really manifest in this elasticity, right? These bottom students are stretched, and when you give them the right support and finally let them go and do great things, they are able to do that. And so we're really excited about these data and what they say about student vulnerability and how it signals the need for targeted outreach, targeted support that really will help the students to unlock that potential that they already have, and that isn't always obvious in the data, but that we can do good things for these students. Okay, so here's a question, and I'm going to actually stop my share. Are you surprised that more academically vulnerable students, or we'd say at-promise students, demonstrate greater elasticity than their peers? And let me invite anyone to kind of come on the mic and share, but I'm also going to go into the Chrome here and look at the chat that I've been missing. So any thoughts about this? Are you surprised at what you're seeing?
I want to understand the light blue bar group better. This is Jody. Were they given the option to participate and they just chose not to, or were they like?
Yeah, really good question.
How do we know that difference is created by their participation and not random factors?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. So let me answer your question. So we use what's called a prediction-based propensity score match. And what that means is when we're building these success quartiles and when we're building this insight, this impact insight, we're matching comparison students in the light blue bars with navy blue participant students based on two propensity scores. One propensity score is their likelihood to be successful. That's the success quartile system. We also build a prediction model around their likelihood to participate in the activity, right? So we're looking at students who are nearest neighbors. It's called a nearest neighbor design, where they're very similar in their academic outcomes and their likelihood to be successful academically, but they're also very similar in their likelihood to participate in academic advising. And so Jody, what you're bringing up is what's called self-selection bias. And in most cases, when you do studies that just do a raw comparison of all participants and all students who didn't participate, that raw comparison is subject to self-selection bias, because you say, well, there's something about the navy blue bars that's very different from the light blue bars, which is what's causing them to participate in advising. We control for that through the propensity score match. And what that allows us to do is to say that the light blue bars are a narrow band of our student body who are very similar to the dark blue bars in really key ways. They're very similar in their academic likelihood of achieving certain outcomes, and we have proof to show that our predictions are very accurate, but they're also very similar in the likelihood to participate in advising. And in the semesters in question, they just didn't happen to participate in advising. All of the student bodies invited to participate in advising, obviously, but what makes this comparison group really a great comparison group, and what makes this result really very robust, is that we're controlling for self-selection bias through that propensity score match. And we're really able to say that advising is causing that 13% gain for those most vulnerable students, or what we would say those most at promise students. Does that answer your question?
It did. Thank you.
Yeah. And the propensity score match, when I showed you this book here, those methods are described on the last page of this book. This book contains a lot of those propensity score matches, and at the last page there's a method section where it talks about a prediction-based propensity score match and how that helps us to learn the things that we're trying to learn. Are there other questions, and then also other thoughts about are you surprised by this elasticity, or is it about what you would expect? So Lisa in the chat says, we have found in our model that establishing every adult as a mentor to our students has increased achievement and persistence. Not surprising. Psychosocial supports are some of the most potent we find in all our research, because we evaluate all these co-curricular and extracurricular experiences to figure out which experiences help students most effectively. And what we are learning is in fact, it's these kind of psychosocial supports of meaningful, sincere interaction with peers and with mentors is really what's leading to huge gains in students' academic success and their ability to be successful. Gains come when students feel like they're a part of a community that has members that know them and care about them, and that's what we're finding in all of our analyses. Was there another thought?
Mitchell, can I jump in? Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Annie.
Okay, terrific. So I think that everything that you're talking about, we know on some level, right? We know that words matter. We know that the way that we approach students matter. We know that relationship matters. We know that, what's true about growth mindsets. But I think what you're doing, which is awesome, for lack of a better adjective in my brain right now, is that you're actually putting it, you're demonstrating it, they're demonstrating that it's happening, and you're showing us through data that it's happening. So it isn't just this anecdote of, like, again, all of these things that I think that we inherently know working with this population of students. So this is fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. I really appreciate that. And one of the things I wanted to say is one of my friends, Matthew LaPlante, he's involved with RAPSA and planning events and speaking and stuff. He's the one who kind of notified me that Reaching at Promise Students was an organization, and I was so excited. I got to get involved with this organization, and partly why I wanted to get involved was because analytics are a tool that is so easily weaponized. And so a lot of people have a stigmatization about analytics because analytics sound like, even predictive analytics sound like you're pigeonholing people, or that you're self-fulfilling prophecy them, or that's Big Brother, like we're spying on these students, we're saying, we're predicting their future and assigning them what their future is. And I know that that is a risk. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, everything has two handles and you need to be sure you're holding the right one. And analytics is a tool with two handles. You can pick up analytics and really weaponize it against students, or you can pick it up and be very conscientious and intentional in your use in a way that actually helps students be successful. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to do this presentation is it's kind of to put in a word and say, hey, y'all, analytics are coming to education, whether or not you like it. A lot of administrators are really captivated by the promise of analytics, and delivering on that promise is a lot more difficult and challenging than you would think. I go around, and I'm a consultant, and I go around and present about ethical considerations on how do you do student success analytics with ethics in mind. And sometimes I get asked to do training for staff who are about to use analytics for the first time, and the training's 5 hours long. Well, I went to Broward College, which is a 63,000 student community college in Southern Florida, and did a 5-hour training. And one of the advisors came up to me before the training started and said, hey, dude, like, really? 5 hours on analytics? Are you kidding me? And I said, just wait, like it'll be fine. Like, you'll be fine. I'm a professional trainer is what I do. You'll be fine, but come up to me afterwards and you tell me if it really was 5 hours on analytics. You tell me if it was really worth it. So I did the training, which, by the way, is mostly about the strengths and limitations of predictive analytics, about appreciative questioning, about compassion-focused understanding of students' lived experiences, about translating data into insights in a way that actually leads you to productive and helpful action. And so I go through this whole thing, and we do lots of activities and different planning and stuff. And I get to the end, and then he came back up and he said, you're right, this was not about analytics at all. And I said, okay, well, what was it about? And he said, how not to be an asshole. And I said, that's actually exactly right. That's kind of one of my professional missions anymore, is as analytics become more and more common, and because they're so powerful, the risks of misusing analytics becomes more and more common. I've kind of made it a goal of mine to go around and talk to people about how we can use analytics more mindfully and in a way that actually produces gains and student success, but without harming people as we go along. That's really important. So any other thoughts? And then we'll get back into the slide deck. Other thoughts or questions that have occurred to you as we've talked here?
Yeah, are you still offering that training on analytics, or?
Sure, yeah. It's mitchellculver.com, and I go around the United States and Canada and UK and Israel and do training about how do we do analytics really mindfully so that people don't get hurt. Because it's so easy to get a prediction like that and be like, oh no, here we go, the student's really off the rails. And it's like, no, the prediction could be wrong in the first place. In the second place, it's more important to understand why they're off the rails, and more important to understand how to get them back on track than it is to peg them as like, oh, they're not going to make it. Or and so the examples are many. I have so many anecdotes of when analytics were used to get to a student just in time. Some of those are about suicidal ideation, and we got to the analytics knew this student's at risk or at promise for intervention. I think that's the better term. The student's feeling vulnerable academically, and let's get them the resources, and then it saves their life. Or let's get them the resources, and in one case, a student was homeless. The computer picked up on that. The computer knew, because she hadn't been logging into Canvas, our LMS, the learning management system. She hadn't been logging in. So the light changed from blue to yellow or something. And the advisor said, hey, it's been a while. Can you come in and chat with me? And the student came in and said, sure. How's it going? How's your homework? And the student said, well, I can't do my homework. My mom and I got kicked out of our living arrangement, and we're living out of the car. I don't have internet. And the advisor was able to get that student an apartment the same day, because the advisor had training as social services and went to the local, the local organization, and was able to get her that housing for her and her mom, but also get an internet connection. And she was able to get back on track with her studies. So these analytics can be powerful, but they have to be put in their place. You can't do anything you want with them, and you certainly can't be managed by them. There's a lot of language in education these days about being data driven. And I bristle at that so hard. Excuse me, don't let the data drive. You're the driver. You can be data informed, but you're the driver, and your knowledge and human ingenuity is way more powerful than what a computer is doing. But does that mean you can't use a computer? No, you can use predictive analytics, but they have to be used within bounds. And that's what that ethics training is all about, is using them within bounds. So if you're interested, and I'll hop over and put this in the chat. It's Mitchell Culver, www.mitchellculver.com. And there's different resources on there. And even some of those trainings are like recorded, so you can kind of see what kind of speaker I am. I guess you hear me now. I'm going to check the chat again because I haven't checked it in a while. Oh, Jody asked, were there students given an option to participate and those light blue errors? Yeah. So we talked about that. All right. Other thoughts or questions before I get back into the slide deck? Thank you, April. Okay. So let me share my screen again and go in here. Okay, so let's do a case study just so you understand. Using analytics to deliver the promise. I don't know why that got cut off, but using analytics to deliver the promise. So here's Bethany, a fake student. Well, she's a real student, but her name's not Bethany, but the example's fake. How do we do compassion-focused caseload care? So the thing is we've been making predictions about students the whole time education has existed. It just looked differently before. Before, when an educator wanted to make a prediction about a student, they would look at their records, look at their grades, how are things going, look at their attendance, and how are things going. They'd look at systems of engagement, so their attendance, they'd look at communication they've had with the student and their parents or whatever it is. And then they would use their own brain, because they're an intelligent professional. They would say, well, based on everything I'm seeing here, I'm worried about where this is going, or I suspect this student might need some additional resources in order to be successful. They're at promise. And that is great, but we get off track because a lot of times things that are relied on are not actually really great signals. For example, at Utah State, this is a pie chart of everyone who has left Utah State without a degree. And half of the pie chart is a 3.0 or above, which means what academic advisors had been doing for a long time, they'd been sitting in front of these systems of record, students' transcripts, and saying, well, if a student has a 3.0 or above, they're fine. I don't have to worry about them. But what we're seeing here in this data on the page here is actually a lot of times when students leave the institution, they're doing fine academically. And all that tells you is that students leave university for reasons other than academic performance. A lot of times students leave in university because of finances, because of social issues, because of family issues, because of any number of things. And it's not always because they're not doing well in the classes. And as I have told you, 3 examples here, the one with lymphoma, the one with homelessness, the one with suicidality, people can leave the university and have perfectly good grades. And in fact, a lot of those students, the girl with lymphoma, she had a 3.78. If the advisor had been relying on grades, the advisor would have never known that the student had been diagnosed. But because she relied on a predictive model, predictive analytics picked up on that pattern right away in the student's LMS activity. And so what we're doing now is we're putting professionals in front of other systems of intelligence. And we call this augmented intelligence, not to be confused with artificial, but augmented, meaning the professional judgment and experience still lies with the professional. But the system of intelligence, which gives these levels of prediction, are just one more resource that can inform the professional judgment and experience of the academic advisor, the mentor. And as long as we put it in that place and we don't let the data drive, but we allow it to inform us, mixed in with the other systems of records, their transcripts, their grades, attendance, systems of engagement, communication we've received from them, as long as we put them into place, it's just another tool and we're not governed by it, then we can do really good things. So when we talk about this, we talk about going to the rescue. We use nursing examples in the training. We talk about the ethics of big data. We use lifeguarding examples. And we talk about augmented intelligence and the ethics of care. So Bethany, she may get flagged as yellow, 50 to 70% likely to persist, but she may have a high GPA. And therefore we may not have caught this if we were only relying on GPA, because all the issues that a student can face that cause academic difficulty may be outside of the signal of grade. She may not even realize she needs assistance. And this is why it's so important not to call them up and be like, hey, we got a computer that tells us that you need assistance. They're not going to respond well to that. That's not good for anyone. Nobody wants to be told that. And when she comes in, she may not even realize. But as you do the appreciative questioning that you're trained to do, then suddenly you come to the realization, they may say, oh, actually, I could use some help because of this or that. And you say, oh, that's good. How funny. You don't say, I knew it. I had a system that told me that you needed help, and finally you've confessed. You say, oh, okay, cool. I'm really pleased to hear that you're asking for help. Let's get that for you. And the other thing is Bethany may avoid asking for help. And this is important because I really am campaigning against what I call the open door advisor, where advisors who have a really good heart, all advisors sign up to be advisors because they're compassionate, right? They're good people. They send emails, and maybe the emails even get open, and they have an open door policy. My door is always open. And this is not what we find are affecting with this kind of at promise notion that there's students out there who need our help that analytics can help us identify. The open door advisor is not a good advisor. And I'll explain. Let me explain. Imagine a shepherd who has a herd of sheep, and they have a pasture, and all the sheep are in the pasture. And then the shepherd builds a shack in the middle of the pasture, and then it goes in and pokes his or her head out and goes, hey, sheep, if you need me, my door is always open. And then goes into the shack and sits down. And you think, well, that's not a good shepherd. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, those sheep aren't going to come and ask for help. If the wolf comes and starts eating them, they're going to be being eaten by a wolf. They can't come and ask for help. So your notion of covering your bases by telling students, hey, my door is always open. Like, whatever you need, my door is always open. They may not even have the capacity to come through your open door. And this is a problem because you've comforted yourself in saying, well, I told them my door was open. What's the problem? And that's seeing student success through a lens of privilege, and we need to stop that, right? So how do we know this is true? Well, this is in that Student Insights report. At Utah State University, 40% of all students are academically advised, but only 27% of our racially diverse students are academically advised. And that's not because of overt racism. Those racially diverse students are being invited to attend advising. They're just not coming through the open door. The door is open, and they're not. This page is a Black Lives Matter inspired page in this Insights report that we put in there to kind of call our institution to the opportunity of facing the challenges of being a predominantly white institution. I think like 82% of our students white. So we really need to face that. And so this page really is a call to action for our university to really face that as a predominantly white institution, we really need to step up to the opportunity to help these racially diverse students. So I write about that, but the point is here's a perfect example of the door's always open, yet these racially diverse students aren't coming through that open door. So going to the rescue with analytics is this question mark of what else are you willing to do in order to go out and get those people to come through your door, because they may not come through by themselves. And analytics can help you target outreach in a really economical way to make that happen. So I'm going to skip this question, and I'm going to tell you about this closing an equity gap experience we have. This is the College of Education. And using analytics, we actually were able to show across our university, and even I've shown this at other institutions as well, the status quo is that more at-promise students are less likely to be served. So the gray column on the far left is all of the students in the College of Education. And 89% of them were able to meet with an academic advisor in spring 19. But when you break out their levels of service by their persistence prediction in our analytics, you can see it's this staircase effect. This is an unseen equity gap that if you're not using analytics, this gap exists and you can't identify it. And it's these red, orange, and yellow students who are not being served because they're not coming through the open door. So I showed this to the associate dean in that college, and then we kind of did some planning, took a humanistic approach, really supported the advisors feeling professional, and then made a plan on how to close that gap. And then the following semester, you can see not only was it closed, but there was a 1.4% gain in student persistence. Well, 1.4% may not seem like a big gain, but the college is 4,000 people. And so 1.4% is 45 people. We had 45 additional students stay enrolled that otherwise would have left if the advisors hadn't done this at promise work. Those students have elasticity. And when we serve them and close that equity gap, their success outcomes are obvious. The really interesting thing here is the gray column there is labeled 79%. The College of Education spent so much time focusing on at-promise students, they actually served less students overall. So it went from 89% to 79% of their 4,000 people. And what that tells you is that student success outcomes aren't about getting to everyone. Student success outcomes are about getting to the right people at the right time, and analytics can help you to do that. This year-on-year persistence change was a product of reversing that staircase and closing that equity gap. And it's really compelling evidence that students are in fact at promise if we just get our priorities straight. In this case, I don't want to go through these priorities, but the number one priority I always tell the advisors who use analytics is their alliance with them and the student. You're the advising alliance is what I call it. That alliance is the number one thing, and analytics take a back seat to that. Your alliance with your students is always paramount, and the analytics are always secondary. So one of the trainings I've gone to, talking about open door advising and switching their mindset and really going to the rescue, going out and getting these students to come through the door. This advisor, this was their feedback about the session. She said afterwards, "For the first time, I saw that I might not be as good of an advisor as I always thought I was. Your example of the open door advisor, always available to her students, really hit home, especially when I got back to my office and checked the GPAs of a week's worth of students I'd seen, some more than once. The students that actually need my help were not coming in. And so I took one of the data lists that we were working from, emailing students who received D's, F's, or withdrew for one or more courses last term, and started calling them instead of emailing them, which is what you suggested. And I do suggest that. For vulnerable students, I don't suggest the email, I suggest the phone call. And advisors always have a hard time with that. They're always like, what, you want me to pick up the phone and call them? How are they going to react to that? I would say, well, if you're compassionate and you have a good alliance with them, they're going to react well. I have 4 appointments now for next week with students who had never seen me or any advisor before. Not as many as I'd like, but it's a start. Thank you for gently making me take a closer look at my own best practices and giving me a new perspective and fresh momentum." So I really appreciate being able to share these things with you. The goal was to help you to see that analytics can be used ethically and effectively to help at-promise students achieve the goals that they've set for themselves. A lot of this was higher education data, but these same principles apply in K-12 settings. And I'm really pleased to have been able to share that. Let's open it up for some question and answer, but also any kind of discussion that you want to have. I'm going to also go look at the chat real quick and see if there's anything there that I can respond to. So Jody says, how is your concept of elasticity different than the concept of resilience? So elasticity is the idea that when applied, when a resource is applied, the student moves a greater distance than a counterpart who has been less marginalized. That's a really important concept to understand. Elasticity means when you're marginalized, but then you're given the same, when you're marginalized, but you're given the same opportunities and even the same resources, you can go farther because you've learned how to use resources really effectively. Now, is that similar to resilience? Yes, it's similar to resilience, but and even maybe a result of resilience because of that resilience that was developed. But elasticity is just is a statistical term. It's the way we measure that students have resilience when they are marginalized and when the barriers are eliminated. One example of this is DFW rates for white students are always much lower than DFW students for Black, Indigenous, and people of color students. And so that's true nationally. The US Federal Trade Commission did an analysis of that. And a lot of times universities will blame DFW rates on the faculty and say, why are your DFW rates for Hispanic students so much greater than for white students. All these people are failing your class. But the US Federal Trade Commission looked and said, no, actually, but people of color who are socioeconomically resourced in the same manner as white students and who've been given the same advantages, their DFW rates are identical to white students. We're not talking about a racial issue, we're talking about a socioeconomic issue, but really the DFW rate's not necessarily a product of the faculty member. Students arrive with issues that have built up over time and they're manifest in the grades that they receive in the class. So be mindful of this idea, that elasticity is the way we measure it, but resilience may exist, but one is more a statistical term and one is more, I guess you'd call resilience more of a theoretical term about the same thing. And he says, so glad the counselors are receptive to these measures. April says, phenomenal work. Thank you. Thank you, April. Other questions or thoughts that folks want to share, either by coming on the mic or anything that you want to put in the chat? It sounds like someone unmuted.
Yes, oh, I did.
Oh, go ahead, Amy.
I did, and this is just it's a personal story, but I think it's a good illustration of how important your work is. So my husband went to Utah State, and he was on an athletic scholarship, and he and his teammates were some of the very few students of color at the time there in the late 80s. And he told me that he spent his entire freshman year in his dorm room because, I mean, for a variety of reasons. But I just think like, oh my gosh, what if, what if he would have had this then? So, I mean, he's fine and he made it through. But I mean, I just think like what an amazing impact this is having on students who are there now. So I guess on his behalf, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. I really believe in this idea that, just like I said, everything has two handles and you got to be sure you're holding the right one. Analytics are, because they're systems of intelligence, they're often viewed as having more power than most tools that we have, than a hammer or than a drill. But it's all the same, it's just a tool. And how you choose to use it really matters. How you choose to implement it, it really matters. And if you handle it in the wrong way, it really can lead to a lot of damage. There's a lot of stories where I know, a university, which I won't name, had really high performing students. All the valedictorians went to this university, and that university developed a predictive model that would predict whether students were red, orange, or green. And they started experimenting and saying, oh, well, if we email the students who are, red and orange, then we can give them advice about what to do about it. They'll do those things and then we'll be all set and they'll get a better result. So they started that program. They started emailing students and saying, hey, our computer system has flagged you as being vulnerable this semester. Here's things we'd recommend that you would do. And at that university, it caused retention rates to go up. So cool, lovely. Well, the people who developed the software wanted to start selling it. And their first customer was a community college just down the road where they wanted to do a beta test. So the community college down the road turned it on and distributed it to all advisors and whatnot. And then did the exact same thing, sent these emails to students and said, hey, our computer noticed that you're feeling academically vulnerable this term, and here's things we suggest you do. Retention rates actually went down amongst those students. And that community college was really very embarrassed, really very embarrassed. How did this happen? What went on? Well, the university that developed the software was admitting all these valedictorians and high-performing students. And when you told those students they were at risk, they want their gold star. And so they'd be like, oh, tell me what I need to do. And then they would do it. At the institution, the community college, when they were telling those students, they were already vulnerable and struggling and suffering and having a hard time and not having all the resources they needed. And then they would get this email that was kind of a punch in the face, like, hey, this computer knows that you're struggling. And the students would go, yep, you know it, I know it, my advisor knows it, well, there's no point to this anymore. I'm not going to do this anymore. And the retention went down because students were being given a self-fulfilling prophecy. They didn't have the capacity to hear that a computer was making this prediction and to come away with the right mindset of, oh, you know, it's going to be fine. It's going to be okay. So in any case, it's a good example of avoiding that self-fulfilling prophecy. I really appreciate all you being here and your time and your questions and your participation. Please feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to continue the conversation, and have a good conference. Thanks so much for being here. Thank you, Ernie. Thanks, Matthew. Thanks for being here.